I'm Kenan Proffitt. Welcome to another Blender branch tutorial. This is part 2 of our Blender visual effects tutorial, and part 1 was modeling and texturing a spaceship, and part 2 is we're going to take that spaceship and we're going to put it into a scene with real footage, and we're going to motion track or camera track our footage so that it looks like our spaceship is actually flying through the air of some real footage that we took, or that I took. Now you can download my footage or you can use your own footage, it's up to you, but let's get right into it. For the motion tracking part, let's come up here to where it has our default scene, change it to motion tracking, and just hit open. Then go to wherever you have saved the footage that you've downloaded, or if you have your own footage, by all means use your own footage, but I'm going to leave a link to where you can download my footage if you would like to do so, but you don't have to. Okay, so now we have our footage loaded in this timeline, and I happen to know that I want to start at frame 4 and end at frame 300. Oops. So you just mark those on your start and end right there. And now we want to hit prefetch the footage under clip. You can see that sort of caches in all of our footage, so that if you scrub through it's smooth, no jerks, and if your computer is impressive it'll play smoothly. Mine doesn't, I'm not sure why. Okay, now this is just really basic camera tracking. I'm not going to change any of the settings except for right here by this motion tab. I'm going to change it from location to affine. And what that does is location, I'll just show you the difference. If we just left it on location and we select, say, this dot right here, which we can drop in a marker by pressing Control and left clicking. If we just select that and we track forward, it just tracks the location of that dot. If I delete that and change it to affine, and we select that, and we hit track forward, what it'll do is, you can sort of see it, this might not have been the best example, it'll sort of twist and conform to that plane. And I find if I just leave it on that, you'll really be able to tell with this road. Here, let me try to track this. I'm going to press Control and left click on this spot right here. I might scale along the x-axis a little bit. And you want to really follow this window right here because this gives you a really good idea of where you're tracking. So now if I track forward, you can see there that was a way better example. It really conforms to the flatness of that road rather than just tracking the location of where the point is. It sort of feels out exactly where this is turning, and you're just going to get a way better track if you just leave it on that for all of your tracks. Okay, so now it's just a matter of dropping in a bunch of tracks and tracking the scene. So don't be intimidated if you've never done camera tracking before, because it's just a matter of trial and error and throwing in tracks. You always want to make sure you're at the very beginning of your timeline for whenever you drop in a new track. So I'm just going to scale, I'm going to track this big blue square. I know there's numbers in there, but really just want the square tracked. So I'll track that one forward, and so far they're all tracking perfectly fine. I'm going to try to track this, looks like a leaf right here or something, so I'll just press Control and left click. And I'll hit track on that one. And you can see there we lost the track for that one, so let's go back to the frame where it lost first, or the first dropped frame. If I just press G, I can grab it and sort of move it right back where it needs to be. And then track forward again. You can see it did a few frames, but that spot goes out of frame for a while. We just dropped it right there. So what I'm going to do is, instead of trying to keep going back and forth with tracking that, I'm just going to call it good up until that point for that track anyway. And we'll come down here to where it says clear on this left hand side, and we'll just check that arrow, and underneath action you see it says clear remained. You want to leave it on that, and what that'll do is you'll just clear the remainder of that track for the rest of the timeline. And what that enables us to do is Blender will keep all the data and information that it tracked up until that point, but then since it's a drop track, it's not going to affect when we solve the camera motion later on. If that doesn't make any sense, I'm going to explain that later. Okay, for now let's just keep dropping in tracks, because I don't want to make this any longer than it needs to be. Let's track. This is another important thing about camera tracking. You need things in the foreground, things in the background, things on the ground, things in the sky, in order to get a really solid track. So let's just track this chimney. I'm going to press S and X, S and Z, sort of scale it down, make it fit that chimney a little bit more. And all your normal modeling tools work inside camera tracking. So G to grab, S to scale, all of that. So let's track this chimney. You can see it tracked perfectly, as represented by the red and blue line, squiggly lines dancing around all over the place. Okay, that's good. Maybe try to track this intersection of this telephone pole right here. It may not track super well. Maybe this guy right here. Maybe it'll pick that up. You want areas of high contrast. And it found it. I tracked that one pretty well. Looks like I have a smudge on my lens right about here. Sorry about that if you chose to use my footage for this. Now let's track these windows. I just sort of have that fit the window a little bit. Pressing S and X to scale that in. I'll track that up. I was pleasantly surprised with how well this footage tracked when I did my final scene. Normally I don't have a ton of luck with camera tracking because you need all these points of high contrast. You need your footage to be properly exposed so that Blender doesn't get confused with what you're trying to track. So I went out and shot this and came back and I was like, hey, that tracked pretty well. So I was happy. Try to track some of these leaves. I don't know how well they'll track. And this is why it's just so cool, this affine feature. I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. But you can see it flattens out all these tracks, and so it knows that it's on the ground laying flat like that. That's just really cool. Looks like there's a big pothole up here, kind of long and skinny. I'm going to try to track that guy. I don't know how well that'll work, but it's worth a shot. Again, I'm just scaling to try to make it fit what I'm trying to track a little bit better. And that worked. Very nice. By the way, if you understand all of this and it's easy breezy and you just want to get to the next part of it, feel free to just skip ahead. I thought about doing time lapse. Some people don't like time lapse. They want to be able to know exactly what I'm doing every step of the way. So that's why I'm taking you through the tedious process of this. Okay, here we have another dropped track, and I guess it doesn't quite go off frame. So I'm just gonna pick the frame that it went off, press G to grab, move it back down to where it needs to be, track it forward, and we'll need to manually track some of these frames, I think, until it gets back in all the way in the frame. Went way off there. There, it found it for the last bit. I'm not sure if it's keeping the same point the whole time. Or maybe it is. Okay. We'll leave that track. And now, if my computer catches up, there we go. What else should we track here? Maybe some of these letters in this sign. I know we have one here. Let's try to do a couple more. Maybe the inside of this P. Let's track that. That worked nicely. Try to track this yellow band here. S and X to scale along the x-axis. Make it try to fit that a little bit. And it didn't get very far with that one. You can manually, adjust these. This one looks like it's kind of a worthless track. It's not getting very far. A lot of times I'll manually try to go through and make sure that track stays till the end. Sometimes I just get fed up and delete it. A lot of times that's just the better thing to do. These might be a little too blurry to track, but let's try it anyway. Yeah, sort of lost that one. I'm just gonna clear the rest of this track. I'll keep what I have, but I'll press that arrow, and that cleared the remainder of it. Let's see, what else? Let's put a track up here maybe, in the center of this telephone pole. That tracked pretty well. We want some more just on the ground. Track the base of this pole. That worked. Very nice. Track the base of this pole. That also worked nicely. See, we have a pretty distinct crack here in this asphalt. I think you might track that. And it did. Very nice. It's really kind of the more successful tracks you have all the way through your footage, the easier it's going to be when you go to solve the footage. Which basically Blender just takes all the data of these markers that were laying in here, and it creates a scene that you can start adding 3D objects to, and it's amazing and awesome. Camera tracking is so cool playing with. Try to do this leaf right here. Very nice. Dropping in tracks. Fun, fun. It's almost Christmas. At least when I'm recording this, it is. Maybe by the time I actually get a chance to post it, it will be Christmas. I'm gonna try to track this sign here. It's tracking very slowly. Oh, and I lost it. So I'll just drag that over, track the middle of that. And once again, it's kind of a weird, massive track. That might be a useless track, but I'm going for it. You never know. Got my coffee here. I roast my own coffee, by the way. It's the way to do it, because you get fresh coffee. I'm kind of a coffee nerd. Blender nerd and coffee nerd. It goes well together because coffee really inspires you to do amazing things. So when I'm working on Blender, I always make coffee. And since I drink so much coffee, I found out about roasting your own coffee from a former boss who roasted it, and it just tasted too good. Tasted better than that coffee shop in America that starts with a star and ends with a Bucks. Really, it really does. I'm going to clear the rest of this track because I'm getting annoyed with it. We might have enough, but I'm going to just keep dropping in more just in case. I don't want to get to the next step and have to come back and throw in more tracks. I think I'm just about done with the tracks. I think we might have enough. Blender won't let you solve a camera track unless there's at least 8. So you need 8. We have more than 8, but it's a good thing. Okay. I think we're set. We have plenty of tracks here. So now what we want to do, come down to the camera, and my camera was just a Canon T3i, which is a APS-C sensor. And so Blender conveniently has that preset right in there. If you don't know what your camera is, if you're shooting your own footage, you can just go online and just search, type in your camera model and then specs, and look at this specs, and it'll tell you your sensor type. That's what mine is. And if you scroll down to lens, just check that drop down menu, and you just type in your focal, or the millimeter size of your lens. So I was shooting on just the cheap 18 to 55 millimeter, that lens that the camera comes with, and I was about at 20 millimeters. So I'm just going to type that in, leave it on millimeters. Now the other thing you want to adjust is right here where it says pattern size. These are 2 keyframes, and you want them to be between where there's sort of the biggest bump in your footage, and Blender will take note of that and sort of try to watch out for that. So if you can see between frame 150, at least on my footage, and frame 220, there's that pretty big bump there. So this was just handheld footage. So I'm going to put in those into the pattern size. And what am I doing? I am doing this all wrong. The pattern size, that doesn't matter anything. Leave that. I'm thinking this is the keyframe. So keyframe, sorry, keyframe 150, pattern size, or keyframe B 220. I keep saying pattern size. Okay, and so now between those 2 frames, Blender is going to search for sort of the biggest jolt, and that'll just help with smoothing that out a bit. So now I think all those settings are in place. We're ready to solve the camera motion. And it went very quickly, and you can see we have a solve error of 0.8, which is fantastic. Really, anything below 2 is usable, but you want it below 1 to be, just really a solid track. So now what we can do is, I'll just go back to frame 1. I'll select 3 points on the ground, say these 3, and I'll say save floor underneath orientation. So now it'll make those 3 points be the floor of our scene. And we'll just set the scale between these 2 points. Set scale. And now if we just click under scene setup, set as backdrop, and set up tracking scene. What that'll do, if we exit the motion tracking and just go to default, is done. If we look through our camera, it has set up a whole scene and whole layers, these 2 layers. And if we go to compositing, it has already set all of this node setup up for us, which is just awesome. So here on top you have our movie clip, our footage, and then we have our background layer, which is essentially our shadow layer, and then our foreground layer, which is where we're going to put our spaceship. And they have it conveniently all set up. I just love that. So let's go back to our default menu. And what we want to do is, since we set those 3 points to be the floor of our scene, this is now the flat part of the scene. And wow, that was brilliant. And it should just fit nicely with where the actual road is because we have these tracks in our scene. We've camera tracked it. Where am I going? So these tracks here, if you can see these, the ones that are flat are the ones that we laid down on the road. So now if we just scrub through our footage, you can see that cube is standing still, and our camera, even though it was a real life footage, is rotating around it as if it were actually there in our scene, which is so cool. So now what we need to do is model out our ground. So this is really easy. What I'm just going to do is drag this out. We can look through our camera to see where we're going with it. Drag this out and sort of over because we want it to sort of just continue down that road. If I just look through the top view, I'm just going to select these 2 points and drag it over. We really just want there to be a layer. This plane is what our shadows are going to be projected on. So if I just hit render, I can show you what I'm talking about. There we have our cube just sitting in the middle of our scene, and that shadow is just being cast onto our scene as if that cube were really in our scene. So if we move this cube up and it's just floating there, if I hit render, you can see that bottom plane acts as our shadow layer. So now it's casting a real life shadow into our footage, which again is awesome. So now we're ready. If we drag this cube all the way to the very end, you can see it just looks like, if we hit render, just looks like that cube is very far away, but there's no shadow because it's gone past, well, it hasn't gone past our plane, but it's gone past our light. If we were to put a light over there, we can just go to the rendered view. You can see faintly a little shadow way off in the distance. I was pressing Shift Z, by the way, to switch between rendered view and non-rendered. Okay, so now it's just a matter of deleting that cube and getting our spaceship in here. And if you want, you can do some fancy modeling, you know, make this actually fit the road exactly where the road would be. I haven't done a ton of that, but I know if you were really creating a detailed scene with a lot of animation, you'd want to basically recreate the scene in 3D. Right now I really only care about a shadow layer, so that's what I'm doing. Okay, so here we have our little road, and we're ready to bring in our spaceship. So now what you can do, I'll just put my cursor somewhere here in the middle. If we go up to File and click Append. Before we do that, we better save this scene. So save as. Always a good idea to save so you don't hopelessly lose hours of work, or minutes in this case. And just save, I'm going to just name it tutorial tracking. Wow, I can't spell. Okay. Save that. And now if we just go File, Append, and go to wherever you've saved your spaceship, which I believe, or the .blend file that your spaceship was that you created in the last tutorial. Or if you didn't create that one and you were lazy and just downloaded the .blend file, then just go to that file. Now, where is it? New model textured, I think. If we just go to object, you see we have all these different objects. You just want the cubes and the domain and the sphere. We don't care about the lamp or the camera. So if we append that, ta-da, there is our spaceship that we have created. It looks cool. Now you want to make sure this is on the top layer. So if I press M, by default it was on the bottom layer, so I need to move that to the top layer. So just click that top layer. So now it's on, if we just select our top layer, it's on our top layer. Go to frame 1. So this is our bottom layer, top layer, and then holding down Shift gets them both together. Okay, so where is it through our camera? There it is. I might scale him up a little, but after you do that, you of course have to apply the scale. So I'm going to press Control A and apply scale. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer to the camera, and really we're not going to rig the spaceship in any way, so there's any fancy controls. I'm just going to do location and rotation keyframe animation. So if you don't know what that is, it's very simple. The most basic form of animation. We're going to move our object. We're going to press I, and that brings up this keyframe menu. And we're just going to choose location rotation. That button right there. So if we select that, and you go to the side, or if I select the spaceship, it only applies it to the spaceship. We go to the side, you see this yellow line on our timeline that has applied a keyframe. So now if we jump ahead to maybe frame 60, I'm going to go to top view. If I just rotate it around a little, have it show off its stuff, and press I again, location rotation. So now between these two frames, you see our ship just pivots like that. And that's pretty cool. So now if we hit render, you can see what it looks like in our scene. And it looks pretty cool. But something's missing, and that's all the nice reflections and glares onto our ship. Now the way to do that, the best way is to go up here to Use Nodes, Color, and select an environment texture. And then open up an HDR file would be the best option. Now, there's a lot of places you can download HDR files for free. They give free HDR pictures if you just search for them. HDRIs, actually, is what they're called. And really that's the best way to light your scene. So I just loaded one in that I've downloaded. And what I'll do, I'll supply you with a panorama, which isn't really a full HD, it's just a panorama I took of this actual scene. And if you want to load that in, it'll work just fine. But I found an actual HDR will work better. But if you don't want to go out and try to find one online, I will supply you with a link to a panorama that I took of this actual scene. But I'm actually using an HDR. So if we just hit render, you can see, now we have that sky look and all that natural lighting and those reflections reflecting off of our glass there, whatever you call it. Okay, so let's jump back to frame 1, and I want to increase the samples a bit. So what I'll do under render, I'll go down to sampling, and let's set this to 100 for now. And underneath these settings, let's just put 4 for each of these, for each of the clamp in it. Clamp direct and indirect. So now if we give that a render, let's add in, I want to delete this lamp we have way back here. I'll press Shift A and add in a sun. Now if we go Shift Z, you can sort of see what that sun is doing. And not a whole lot. So I'm just going to rotate this. Make sure it's above our object for one thing. We want that pointing down on it. Just because the sun was coming from this direction when I shot this footage. I want to crank that up to a 3 and see what that looks like. You see there, it's casting a nice shadow. So now if we do a test render, let's see what that looks like. There we go. That is looking nice. We have our shadow, which is coming from our spaceship, and we have our HDRI image loaded in, so we have the nice reflection of clouds. or if you've used the panorama shot, you should see some reflections as well. And so it is looking nice. Now, what's left is really just, it's up to you how much you want to animate this guy. If you want to have it sort of do what I did and slowly spin around, you can just rotate it. And what I did, of course, was add some pivots so it goes from side to side. I press I, location, rotation. And now if I go in between those two frames and press R again and just add some more pivots, it'll keep where this ends up. It'll just add sort of an added little pivot there. That just gives it sort of that hovering above ground effect and look. So I might add in a couple here, pivot to one side, pivot to the other side, just add in those keyframes. And then for the blast off, I'm just going to jump to frame 60 here. And I'm assuming, I mean, this is pretty simple stuff. It's not any advanced animation at all. So I'm not going to do a whole lot here. I might have this turn. Press I, location, rotation. And for the blast off, you want it to only be a very few amount of frames because you want it to go pretty fast. So I might just do 10 frames. So you see in frame 240, it's stuck there. If we jump to 250, I'm going to move my ship way down to the end of our scene. You can see how small it is from the viewport. And just rotate it up. By the way, if it just starts disappearing into thin air like that, then you just need to adjust the clipping. And what that is, I'll explain. If you come here to, if you select your camera, come to the camera settings. And this clipping, you see where it starts. If you just drag that out, drag that to 0 and drag the end out till you can see the rest of your object. And that takes care of that problem. So now I'm at this keyframe. If I just press I, location, rotation, you can see zoom, our ship just takes off. But now we need to have it fly off screen, so I'm just going to drag it up, maybe do some fancy rotating, press I again. So if we just jump back to frame 1 and hit play, because we have that our fire object set up, you can see that automatically will just play through all the frames, and it's going to follow our spaceship perfectly. And that is looking cool. Because we've parented this domain to our spaceship, the fire will go wherever the ship goes, and obviously you'll want to add in a lot more detail to your animation here. I was just trying to give an example of what you can do, and we'll just let it play through the end because that will zoom. There we go. Cool. And what you can do if you'd like is with this object selected, come over here to the what is this called? Physics tab. And if you come down to smoke cache, jump to frame 1, you can set the end value to 300 because that's how long our timeline is. And if you just go ahead and hit bake, that'll bake all of that and it'll set that fire in stone to be exactly what your animation is, and it'll just save a lot of time when you go to render, which is what I'm really big on, saving time rendering. So there, it's all baked up, and now you can jump to any frame because you've baked it. Okay, there we go. Look at that. Spaceship about to take off. It's looking cool, but it is missing some major glares and lens flares and all that awesome stuff. So if we go to compositing, you can see we want to change a lot of this stuff, but it's really just this foreground layer that we're going to be adjusting. So I'm going to move all these over. And if I press Shift A and go down to, where is it? Distort, I believe. No, not, we don't want to do that yet. If we go to, I'm just going to search for it. Glare, drop in a glare node. Right away, that sort of makes things a little bit better. We have those awesome lights shining, but let's change it up a bit. Maybe change it to low. We get some brighter streaks. And change the fade, put it a little bit down so it's not quite as extreme. We'll increase the iterations to 4. So now we have some streaks coming off those lights, which is cool. But we want to add in some more, so I'll press Shift A. I'll search for a, let's see, what do we want? Oh, let's just duplicate this. Press Shift E, duplicate that node. Change it from streaks to ghosts. And this is what's going to add in that lens flare that just goes everywhere. And higher is sort of more distinct, so I'll leave it on. Let's go medium. And let's turn the fade down on this first one so it's not quite so bright. Again, you may hate lens flares. Maybe you don't like J.J. Abrams movies. You may hate all the glows and glares. I like them. I think they look more sci-fi. Let's turn the threshold up on this. 1.5, that's good. And that's looking pretty cool. So now we want to add in some color correction, color grade this up. So I'm going to press Shift A, go down to color and color balance. Throw that in there. And as always, what you want to do is change the lights to be sort of yellowy. So that way our sunlight sort of comes through in a nice warm way. And you can increase the light if you want as well. And with our darks, of course, you want to take the darks down a bit, increase the saturation. And I just realized I'm only affecting this top layer, and I don't want that. I want this to be affecting the whole thing. My apologies. So let's take these, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to plug in this alpha over to this first node. And we'll plug in the color balance wheel to the composite. We'll just move these things around a bit. Sorry about the confusion. I'll plug in this vector blur to the bottom of that alpha over. And there we go, we're back at square one, where it's making sense. But we don't see our adjustments because it's not plugged into the viewer. So let's drag this over, plug it into the viewer. And there we go. Now we're actually correcting the whole scene. Sorry about that. So now let's change the darks to sort of blue, because that's what gives that sci-fi color graded look. You can go however extreme you want. I think that looks pretty cool. And by decreasing these blacks, that's how you sort of boost your contrast in your scene. And the mids are just for minor adjustments if you want just sort of an overall blending light. I wouldn't adjust the color of the mids too much. That's sort of a basic way to color correct it. This might be a little too dark. Maybe a little too blue, I don't know. That's looking good. That's how you really blend animation with your live action footage. It really all comes together when you color balance it. You're able to, along with this shadow from our shadow layer, blended with all of that, it's really starts getting undistinguishable what's really there and what's not. Okay, now last but not least is a vignette. So I have a simple little tutorial on, I'm just going to remove that for now. I have a simple little tutorial on how to add 3 simple post-processing things, and strangely enough, I am doing all 3 of them for this scene. So let's add in a lens distortion, put the distort to 1, and now we will add in a blur node. Let me search for that because I'm lazy. And before the blur node is an invert node. So search for invert. No, I'm sorry, it's not an invert node. What am I thinking? It's a math node, but you set, instead of add, set it to less than. Let's plug the lens distortion into the bottom, set this to a value of 0, and there we have our round curve going on here. And with our blur node, let's change it to fast Gaussian. Put a value of 55 for each of these. And that just gives that nice blurred corner there. And now if we add in a mix node and plug that in, set it to multiply, and get our image output from our color balance wheel and just drag that into the bottom of that. So now with this factor, oh, never mind, drag it into the top of that. So now with this factor, we adjust how much vignette we want around our scene. And you can also increase sort of the spread of it with this size button. I like to go a value of 2 just so it's a subtle vignette and you don't actually see the circle of it, just so those corners are darkened a bit. And now we want to finally plug in our composite, and there we go. So that may have been a confusing node setup. I know I made some mistakes there at the beginning, but basically we have, after the alpha over, so we've combined our layers together, foreground and background. We have some glare nodes. Then we have our color balance wheel. Then for the vignette, we have lens distortion, less than node, another blur node, and then multiplied together using a mix node. Those are plugged into both the composite and the viewer. So now we're ready. If you change this side view to your timeline, you can jump to any frame and hit render and see what it looks like. Alright, there you go. There we have one frame of our scene completed. And we have our spaceship in the air. That only took a couple minutes to render that, 100 samples. You'll want to boost your samples for your final render, I'm sure. Maybe 200 or 300. You don't really need that many because it's video. And yeah, that's it. For your animation, just make sure your start and frame numbers are set to the right number, and your output directory is where you want to save the images. I always like to do PNG, it's a little bit higher quality, and then just hit animation. And what that'll do is render out a folder of PNGs. And then what you can do later on with those PNGs, if I just save this, I'll open up a new folder in Blender, or a new file. And if we change this to video editing, if you just go ahead and add in a movie, and then select wherever you saved that folder of PNGs. So say, I don't even know where I would have any. I'm sorry, I said movie. When you add in, you want to select image, and then you have your folder of PNGs. And if you just add that to your strip, this is an old test render. Forgot I still had this. Yeah, you can see the many processes I go through for these tutorials. That looks terrible right there. But anyway, this is just an example. I didn't really know what would show up when I added that in. So you just have, it'll play through all those PNGs like it's a movie clip. And if you then go to default and instead of PNG under your render, change it to QuickTime and then hit animation, it would then actually render out a QuickTime file that you could upload to YouTube or Facebook or wherever you wanted to. And that's just a better way of rendering out videos. I know I kind of went through that quickly, but I wanted to make sure I explained that since I said this was a tutorial on the animation part of it. That's just a really good way to render out animations. First you do a pass with just the PNGs, then you go to the video editing and you throw all those together on the timeline, and then render it out as an animation and a QuickTime file, or whatever file you prefer. So that was just a simple tip there on that. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope maybe if you didn't necessarily care about the spaceship, but you just wanted to know about camera tracking, I hope it was useful and wasn't just a total waste of your time. So yeah, that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and thanks for sticking it through both tutorials, and I will see you, or you will see me, or you will hear me, as I've said before, in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.